this on? I think so. Yeah. You can hear me, right? Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you to Ibu Amalia from Ministry of Development Planning for inviting me here this afternoon and to have a special session on the G20 Global Blended Finance Alliance, which is something which is relatively new that we hope that we can share with you. And I do hope the panelists will also be able to give more input into what we're trying to do here. So my job is to provide the setting of the scene for the discussion today. So let me start with talking about blended finance, as well as obviously explaining to you all what is the G20 Global, G20 Bali, I must not forget the Bali, G20 Bali Global Blended Finance Alliance. So for short, GBFA. So if you could just put the first slide up. Yes. So we start with why. Why is blended finance important? Because this whole session we will be discussing about blended finance. It's the hope that blended finance can fill the financing gap. So this, as we all know, in 2015, there was a promise of $100 billion to come from developed countries to developing countries to help fund climate action. This goal was only met in 2022. But despite this 100 billion being met, depending on the estimates that you believe in, basically there's been an estimate that the funding gap is actually $2 to $3 trillion a year for climate action. And we haven't even put SDGs in there. And the mobilization from concession funds is still low for developing countries. The figure, the bar that you see on the right there tells you that for every $1 of concessional funding, you're only crowding in or generating about 30 cents of private sector funding. So there's something that needs to be addressed, especially for developing countries. Next, our focus is on, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so developing countries face barriers in being able to crowd in climate finance. So there, when you look at blended finance, you will see that this flow of blended finance has happened. It's still not a large amount, but it is mostly going to developed countries. There's not very much going to developing countries. Why? The main barriers are risk, right? The perception of political risk, credit risk, project risk, exchange rate risk, so that the average credit quality of emerging markets tend to be, of course, below investment grade. And that leads to high capital costs, which really hinders private sector's interest. And if you are hoping for blending from the government coming in with a budget, there's limited fiscal space. And there's always the issue of policy and regulatory frameworks, as well as capacity, so human capital and knowledge gap. And the fact that it's still a work in progress in terms of coming up with the climate finance data as well as the standards. Next slide, please. Blended finance is not a magic bullet. We would like it to be the magic bullet, but blended finance, the intention is that it can address the key barriers, mobilizing private finance at scale. So it can help to address the key barriers. If you have high risk and high cost, how can we really have innovative financial instruments that can de-risk or reduce the cost? Whether it's guarantees, like the World Bank has MIGA, which is now, I heard, is a one-stop shop guarantee, where you can get your country risk, project risk, and policy risk, if I'm not mistaken, a guarantee in one place. So this is one of the innovations that have come about recently, but many more needs to happen. And then when we talk about blended finance and how to address this financing gap, there's always this discussion. There's a lot of financing here, but where are the projects? And those who have the projects say, well, we have tried to develop the projects. Where's the money? Or a country is saying, okay, we've tried to come up with our climate action plan. Where's the money, right? This is not coming together. And many of these, to the extent there are examples, they tend to be small. So the issue of scaling up becomes a big question. So blended finance is the intention. You know, I've had long conversations with Ewan on this. People define blended finance differently, and you can actually in the panel hopefully tease this out a little bit. But here, what we're talking about is how do we use catalytic capital from public, given limited space, public meaning government budgets, or concessional resources, or philanthropy, or grants, to increase or catalyze private sector investment in sustainable development by addressing these barriers. But I was talking to, Ray Dalio is here at the moment. So we've had like 2 days of discussions with Ray Dalio. And he was saying that, well, if you hoped for concessional funding, it's not very big. And even if they could scale up how much the private sector they can crowd in, yeah, that's probably good. But what you really need is to address the venture capitalists and the institutional investors who now have a double bottom line. They have to get profit, but they also have to deliver on ESG. Their investors are asking them to. So if you could target them and then combine it somehow with those de-risking or reducing cost instruments, you might get the scale you need, right? So I think there's maybe a sequencing kind of problem, but really the intention is, I think, how do we bring multi-stakeholders to the table and discuss how we can improve risk and return profiles, allow the technical assistance and capacity building in a country to help build a pipeline of projects and drive scale. So I'm just trying to describe to you the objectives. And I thought it's helpful if I give you an example of what I'm trying to say as the objective. This is just a very big picture story about what we're trying to do in Indonesia, what we call the Indonesia Energy Transition Platform. Energy, why energy? It contributes 58% to our greenhouse gas emissions. And we have to think about it in a holistic way, that it is about climate commitments of coal phase down, not exit, and decarbonization of developing the clean energy as well as the grid and so on and so forth. What does it mean? It means, first of all, the enabling policies and conditions, which is about the energy sector policies and vision, coal phase down, renewable, et cetera, feed-in tariff. But it is wider than the energy sector. It's got to be about the overall development macro policy. For instance, coal and fuel subsidies to get the relative price of carbon right, carbon pricing and taxes. How do you deal with a state-owned monopoly? How much is the government budget going to be allocated for climate? And actually, Sri Mulyani already has the calculation. According to her, we have a budget. We need 280 billion. 1/3 of that will come from government budget. The rest will have to come from other sources. And then what are we talking about? We're not just talking about coal phase out or renewable energy, which is tend to be more attractive for commercial investors. You have to talk about the cleanup of the asset, investment in the grid and technologies, and just and affordable transition. So there are different investment needs with different levels of risk and return, as well as ESG outcomes. And on the other side, you have different sources of funds which need to come together. And this is where the multi-stakeholder story of convening, making it happen, is very, very important. And this is what the global, next slide please. This is what the G20 Bali Global Finance Alliance intends to do, is to provide a solution-based alliance for the current issues faced by climate finance in developing countries. And really, it is about mobilizing finance at scale, but with very much a developing country lens, and enable the global South countries to be able to use blended finance as a strategic tool to bridge the financing gap, both for climate as well as for SDGs. And once, this is about South-South learning, about finding the projects or portfolio of projects that can actually demonstrate that you can achieve this if you did a multi-stakeholder collaboration, you could actually come up with solutions that combine the different sources of funds with the different investment needs that have different profiles of risks and return. So that's, I think, what we really want to do is to create this very robust multi-stakeholder collaboration. And the key is in these three functions of the Global Blended Finance Alliance, which is first and foremost, and this comes from the learning of the last few years, countries have to own and lead the platforms for climate transition as well as for achieving climate and development. So it's not just about climate action. It has to be about climate integrated with development. The development outcomes are very important. So how do you have continue to grow, have development, but address your climate actions in hopefully in an ambitious way that can deliver the reduction of the climate as well emissions, as well as have growth and development. So part of the G20 Bali GBFA is to help or facilitate or share experiences, South-South learning and experiences, including, we were with the Tanzanian delegation this morning, and one of their questions was quite interesting. They said, okay, this really sounds interesting. How can you help us negotiate with those who have the funding so that we can get this put together? So, the ability to negotiate what you think is important for your country in terms of development, but at the same time design it in a way that you can get the returns is really a big challenge. And we would like to facilitate and work with countries, also with partners, obviously, to have what we call country-led platforms. So it can be, it should be country-led, country-owned, and country-driven. You have to have that happen. Otherwise, we feel that this cannot be as effective as it should be. And facilitating that together with countries is going to be key. And countries need to decide. You can't fix everything, so what is your priority? So like in the case of Indonesia, the priority would be, given the mitigation and adaptation challenges and priorities, would be energy and a nature-based solution in food and land use, for instance. But in other countries, it could be different. And then where's the SDG? You also need to think about the SDG priorities. And then there's the whole pillar of institutional capacity building, the human capital, the training, the ability to structure projects, and institutions that need to be reformed, including in many countries, not just in Indonesia, in the energy sector, for instance, you have a state-owned monopoly. How do you deal with structuring the state-owned monopoly so that it can be a positive or contributing to the energy transition? And then finally, the convening and the partnerships. A lot of, World Bank has done this in the past. Many, what we call, what do you call it? The development partners, where you get together with all the development partners in a country to work together with a country. But this is going beyond that. It's not just the development partners. It's going to have to include philanthropies, private sector, and obviously the local stakeholders. So it's a wider partnership and convening that needs to happen, and it needs to be led by the country together with partners that can facilitate and help. And G20 Bali GBFA does intend to provide this solution-based alliance. And right now, so I will close because I know I've probably already exceeded my 10 minutes, but I won't go into the rest of the slides. You can, we'll probably have it with the organizer. I'll just explain where we are in terms of setting up the GBFA. The GBFA, we would like to create the GBFA as an international organization, and right now we have 9 founding members who signed an LOI back in May 2024, and right now there's a process of negotiations to create this Articles of Agreement, as well as create it as a international organization that can start doing these things. But in parallel, we are also already beginning to do our work. And what we're looking for is also providing showcase examples, including Indonesia, including other countries like South Africa, of good examples. You know, what are the learnings? What are the best practices? And what to do and what not to do is equally important in terms of understanding how do we shape an effective country platform that can bring in all the different sources of fund and really make the climate transition, address the climate, the financing gap for climate transition and achieving your SDGs. So we are at the beginning of this journey. So maybe just go to the last slide. We are at the beginning of this journey, but we would like to think the uniqueness of the, could you just go to the last slide? Okay. This is a call for joining us on this journey. It's not easy, it's not complicated, it's not a magic bullet, but let's do this together. It's a process. Let's join us on this GBFA journey to shape the future, and together I think we can achieve a more sustainable world. Hopefully with not just talking, but with real concrete results. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Mari. Please remain on stage. We would like to have a group photo together with all the distinguished speakers. Please join on the stage. And also moderator, please join also on the stage to have a group photo together with Ibu Mari Pangestu. Ibu Deputi, kami persilakan. Okay, everybody, please look at the camera. Yes. On my count, please. 3, 2, 1. Smile. One more time. One more time. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, speakers, and also moderator. Oh, okay. So speakers prefer to directly sit on the stage. Okay, thank you. But before I pass to the moderator, okay. Yes, so ladies and gentlemen, yes, we just had the keynote speech from Professor Mari Pangestu. Thank you, Ibu, once again. Thank you so much. Yes, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the main agenda of this thematic session on G20 Bali Global Blended Finance Alliance, a breakthrough of multi-stakeholder financing for development. And on the stage, we have already moderator and also all distinguished speakers. And this session will be led by our moderator, Ms. Evelyn Holland, Director at Systemic Ltd. Correct. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give your big round of applause for the moderator and speakers on the stage. Moderator, time is yours.
Selamat siang. Can you hear me? Yep. Good afternoon, esteemed guests, panelists, and participants. I will quickly introduce our panelists. We have got Mr. Ewan Marshall, Ewan Marshall, Country Manager for Indonesia, Timor-Leste of IFC. We have Pak Pradana Murthy, the Director of Risk at PT SMI. Pak Dodi, the Commissioner of PT Bali Kerthi Development Fund, and finally, Dr. Ruth Shapiro, co-founder and chief executive of the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society. It's an honor to moderate this session today, and thank you, Ibu Mari, for setting us up and reminding us the context of the G20 Bali Global Finance Alliance, which we hope to be a breakthrough for multi-stakeholder finance and development. Before I pass to our panelists to share their insights, I just want to remind the 4 things that we hope to get out of today's session. So, firstly, we want to understand how blended finance can strategically mobilize investment in developing countries. We secondly want to explore the roles of governments, local intermediaries, multinational development banks, philanthropies, and private sector to resolve the financing gap that Ibu Mari just laid out so clearly. We hope to share best practice and lessons learned from successful blended finance implementation. And finally, gather input and recommendations to enhance the GBFA's impact and scale. So, starting with our first speaker, Mr. Ewan Marshall. You're part of IFC, and you've been responsible for developing and managing investment products that mobilize third-party capital. We'd love to hear from yours and the IFC's experience. What are the successful examples? What were their success criteria? How did they overcome any challenges that they faced?
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to Bappenas for affording us the invitation and the opportunity just to talk a little bit about how IFC thinks about and implements its blended finance activities. Ibu Mari closed by saying it's a journey. So I hope you're sitting comfortably, because I'd like to take you on IFC's journey, and I'd like to go back to the beginning. So we're going back 70 years. This could be a long presentation. So IFC is a member of the World Bank Group. We are the private sector arm. Our role is to provide finance on commercial terms to projects and businesses that create development impact. We don't provide cheap money, we provide commercial capital. And that was our philosophy, and that was the cornerstone of what we did for 50 years. But as Ibu Mari said, there's opportunities where one can be more creative, where one can take concessional funding and blend it, hence the blended finance, with commercial financing to create opportunities and to finance businesses that otherwise might not have been financed. And so our journey on blended finance really began about 20 years ago, as we started to see the possibility and the promise that blending concessional with commercial capital could bring. So over the last 20 years or so, we've slowly started to scale our use of blended finance. And so we've now financed over 540 different projects, 97 different countries, deploying $5.9 billion worth of concessional financing in order to mobilize close to $30 billion of commercial financing. So thankfully our track record seems to be doing okay relative to some of the figures that Ibu Mari was saying. We're managing to leverage $6 for every $1 of blended finance that we've applied. So how do we do it, I suppose, is the question. So what are the lessons learned? So one of the key things when we started to embark upon this, we started with a rigor that said we're a commercial investor. And now we're going to start taking concessional financing and we're going to put it together. So we need some principles and an approach. And there were 5 key things that we thought about. The first is there needs to be an economic case. We start from the principle of an investment in a private entity. We start from the principle that there is a business here and that the use of concessional finance gets us to a financing solution. So you need to be able to make an economic case and a business case. The second is that we test it to ensure that we use the lowest amount of subsidy, minimum concessionality possible. This is not about writing blank checks, either to underpin investors or to support projects. It's about using government and scarce philanthropic capital wisely and strategically, and so we want to maximize every dollar that we spend. The third is we want this to be temporary. You can't just continually subsidize. The money runs out. So you need to be supporting projects that have a pathway to commercial viability. So that tends to lead you into first movers, new technologies, maybe they've got a new process, maybe there's some initial first mover costs. Maybe it's a subscale enterprise, and so the business doesn't work. Maybe it's political risk, it's geographic. What are the pathways to get to scale? The third and the fourth is demonstration. So we do want to get to scale. That is important. So we want to be able to crowd in more and more private capital on an ongoing basis. And the fifth, as a global institution, I mean, we do look to ensure that all of our projects have the highest standards. So we can go to the next slide. So IFC is a commercial investor. So let me be clear. We don't provide concessional funding. That's not what we do. We provide commercial funding. But we work with people who do provide concessional funding. And this is mainly governments, but we're starting to see more philanthropies coming into support by being able to provide cheaper sources of financing that we can blend. So as you can see on the screen, we have a wide range of platforms and partners that can support us. And we grew out of effectively a climate-focused world to doing a number of things in climate, in agri, in gender, specifically focusing on lesser developed countries. So a couple of takeaways. One, from an IFC perspective, we now have a broad coverage, right? It supports the waterfront of everything we do as an institution, which is really helpful. But the other thing is that each of these partnerships has their own priorities. And this is really important. People are giving, maybe it's tax dollars, maybe it's philanthropic capital. They have goals with that money. They want to see it used in a certain way, which can make it restrictive. It's a very clear direction. And so one of the things that we've done as an institution is, while we respect that and we set up vehicles with very clear ambits of what we can and can't do, we then seek delegated authority. We seek the ability to take that money, to blend it with our own money, and to deploy it to our clients. We don't go back and ask for opinions on or approvals on each and every deal. Now, to do that, you have to have two things. You have to have those principles. You have to have that approach that says, I'm going to look after your money. And so we set up separate teams inside IFC whose sole job is to look after the interests of the people who are giving us money, to make sure that we are deploying it strategically and at minimum concessionality. So next slide. So what does all of this mean? So I work for a finance institution, so there's a few complicated boxes for those that are interested in financial structures. But let me simplify it. There's three things that concessional financing, when blended together with commercial financing, can do. The first is concessional funding can take the same risk as commercial funding, but just be cheaper. So it lowers the blended cost. The second thing it can do is concessional funds can have the same price, but take more risk. So it lowers the risk profile. And generally what this means is that the concessional funding gets paid later. And the third way is that you can provide performance incentives and grants to people who are actually delivering the outcomes you want, so you can lower their pricing. And you can do this on equity transactions, you can do it on debt transactions, you can do it with derivatives, you can do it on single assets, you can do it on pools of assets. And as IFC, we've used all of these structures. If we go to the next slide, I won't spend too long. Can we go to the next slide? I won't spend too long on the examples, but next slide, please. Thank you. We've used them in different ways. We worked with a leasing company in Haiti. Really challenging environment. Using concessional finance to bring down the cost of debt. We worked on renewable energy in Myanmar. It was a high-risk environment, using concessional structuring to lower the risk. And then in Indonesia, a homegrown example, we provided a significant financing to OCBC. Terms were commercial. OCBC doesn't need blended finance. But this was the first green bond in Indonesia. OCBC was pioneering. It was pushing the boundaries of what could be done with regards to supporting energy transition and green projects. And so we provided performance incentives to recognize and to help them on that journey and to cover some of the costs of being a first mover. So go to the next slide. 540 projects, 97 countries. So one of the questions that was asked is, how do you think about impact? We think about four things. One, leverage. Ibu Mari mentioned this. Really important. How do you use your concessional finance to really catalyze more commercial flows? So leverage is crucial. The second, project level outcomes. What's really important, and this is something that we do for all of our projects, but in blended finance particularly, really what are these projects delivering? What does that mean in terms of greenhouse gas avoided? What does it mean in terms of people reached, people served? The third is demonstration, private capital mobilization. If we can just go to the next slide. Thank you. Private finance. How do you really scale this going forward so you can really tap into the large pools of capital that Ibu Mari was talking about? And the fourth is geography. How do we reach the harder, lesser developed countries and really help them on their journey of development? So, to round up, a couple of lessons. Lesson number one, it's where Ibu Mari started. It's not a silver bullet. This is not just the answer, right? This isn't just about cheap money. We still need to change and to reform the institutions and the enabling environment. We also need partners to lean into the process. It can't be, give me some cheap money so I can keep doing what I've always been doing. We're trying to affect change. Both parties need to come together. Secondly, it's not free. Okay? There needs to be a robustness and there needs to be a rigor with which you approach the use of blended finance. There needs to be a pathway to commercial investment, and you need discipline in thinking about subsidy and minimum concessionality. The third is process. This is other people's money. We have a fiduciary duty to look after it. And so how do we set up a transparent set of policies and a governance process so that people feel that their money is being looked after? But the final note I would leave is it is a hopeful tool. And we've seen this as IFC in the journey of the last 20 years, but it really can be transformative. I think it allows us to add more to what we do. It gives us license to be creative and innovative. And sometimes innovation is needed to really break some of the key bottlenecks. And I think what we've seen is that if we can use this well, we can start to crowd in more commercial financing. And I think the goals that Mary outlined in her presentation, I think are within reach if we can start to build and deliver a solid foundation using blended finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ewan, for giving that global context and making the case of how it could be, as well as starting to build up to that scale of 30 billion that you've talked about in the past. Bringing it back, I guess, then to Indonesia, Pak Pradana, you've worked at PT SMI since 2009 in a variety of different roles, including head of sustainable finance. What are the examples of blended finance that have been successful in Indonesia, and what has enabled their success?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We, as SMI, I think we do a little bit of what IBRD is doing, meaning that providing concessional financings and technical assistance. We sometimes do it, yeah. And we also do a little bit of what IOC is doing, commercial financing as well as equity investment. So we are in between these two major institutions in the way we are operating here. I think the difference is that the scope of our operation is just limited to Indonesia, and specifically in infrastructure financing, and also we are much smaller. So that's the difference, but the analogy is there. We are trying to become the Indonesian Development Bank, as so to speak. So being that is great because Indonesia needs a development minded intermediaries to trying to bridge the gap between projects or activities with financing. So we've been doing a lot of our own activities since our inceptions back in 2009, and we know from the start that we don't have the full muscles to actually trying to fill the financing gaps that exist in Indonesia development plans that's devised by Bappenas. I think that's where the start of that we need to leverage our own capital. So, of course, we have our own books to leverage, but there's a limit to do that for sustainability of our existence. So it's not logical that to leverage everything in our books. So we need to find ways how to collaborate, in trying to finance projects by projects in a blended finance manner. In the year that we start our operations back in 2009 and 10, we didn't know that it's going to be called by blended finance, but we actually did it. The first, I think that at that time was a plain vanilla structured finance. The first one we did it was in 2010. That was to finance a mini hydro project in West Sumatra. We're trying to provide commercial financing, but we know that the equity portion needs to be enhanced. So the lack of capital from the developers is an issue at that time, and it's still today. So we try to bring in people that can actually invest in the equity tranches. So we collaborate with the private equity at that time. So blended finance, when we started, it's not about trying to leverage public concessional financings to get private capital. It's actually commercials married with another commercials. Yeah. So that's a structured, a plain vanilla structured finance that in itself it's a blended finance approach, but it works. So the project gets developed, get constructed and operated, and everything went well. So we started from there, trying to identify various other funding sources that we can actually collaborate with. And because we know from our assessments on projects on the ground that sometimes projects needs equity, sometimes the project needs grant, sometimes the project needs de-risking. So we're trying to identify the funding sources that can actually bring in that types of facilities. So if we can go to the next slide. So that's why we are trying to tap into various sources of funding, and that started in 2015, 2016, and we were the first accredited entity by GCF in Southeast Asia back in 2017. So that's the kind of leveraging activities and tapping activities that we are doing since then. And now what you see in the slide is the SDG Indonesia One blended finance platform that we launched back in 2018. That's actually, there's a lot of funding sources out there that is actually interested to co-finance SDG projects in Indonesia, including renewable energy. Yeah. And the amount of pledges that we receive with launching the platform was more than $3 billion US. So it's quite a substantial amount of money by just having one launch of a platform. However, then realities started to sink in, and I think until today, we only able to disburse just over 10% of that to projects. And most of that is still in the project preparation stage. Yeah. So that indicates the kind of challenges that we are facing in terms of, wait, that's not actually plain sailing, that there's a project, there's finance, then voila. It's not like that. It's the project needs to meet the requirement of finance. Finance need to understand the project risks. So I think that process is actually quite tedious, and a lot of hard work needs to be put into that. A lot of discussions and a lot of site visits. So I think we need more of that in trying to realize blended finance. Next. So that's the types of facilities that we are talking about from the development stage, either it's grant funding or technical assistance. The risking mechanism, it can be in the form of reimbursable grant. We actually devised one right now since 2017 with the World Bank, trying to provide a de-risking mechanism for geothermal exploration financing. So that's also another asset class that we need to unlock. Geothermal is quite key to Indonesia, and we need to unlock that sector. There's also investment grant that we've seen that there is also a provider that looking for impact investment, but not necessarily the financial return. So great. So we can actually find projects that actually can fit into that interest. And then, of course, financing, be it the concessional financing or commercial financing. So that's the types of financing facilities that we need. Next. Now, they say the picture paints 1,000 words, so I just show pictures that of projects that we have successfully delivered. And I showed symbols of institutions that was involved in those projects, but beyond that, there's a lot more institutions that actually work with us in SDG Indonesia One. So the first project on the left-hand side is a mini hydro project in Sumatra. It's a small project, it's only 2 times 3.5 megawatts. It's actually combined a range of facilities to actually enhance their project development documents. So, for example, in doing biodiversity study as well as biodiversity management plan, because mini hydro sometimes they have to look into the impact that project has on the river environment. So that's what is being disbursed to this project, and then the financing arrives from us and AFD. And then the right-hand side, there's an investment grant that actually that was introduced. When we were trying to finance this particular project, which is actually located in Bali, it's clear that commercial financing can only do so much. So there's a limit that commercial financing can actually be put into this project. In this case, it's 65%. And the equity investment side, the developers also think that, well, we can only put this amount as a maximum because beyond that it's no longer feasible for us. So that's why there's a gap to be filled, and fortunately there's somebody can actually provide investment grant to cover that gap, and the project can be successfully delivered. So that in that case, the UK Mentari program helped us in doing so. So that's the kind of examples. Next, this is probably the last slide. It's just trying to summarize the challenges and the lesson learned that we have in trying to realize blended finance in projects. And the first one is, of course, the alignment of interest, because the public sector thinks a certain way, the private sector thinks a certain way. Generally speaking, the public sector will tend to look into the social economic impact of projects. The private sector will tend to look for financial returns of projects. But more and more so nowadays, there seems to be more alignment of interest if we're talking about SDG, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about NDC. It seems to be more and more intersections between public and private sector. So people start to speak on the same page, and it makes us easier to actually deliver blended finance. But in alignment of interest is key to the success of blended finance. And then the complexity of structuring. Sometimes we need this kind of facility, sometimes we need that kind of facility. It needs to be tailored in the needs of the projects, and the study needs to be specific for projects, and it cannot be replicated just like copy and paste. It doesn't work like that. So we need to tailor in projects by project basis. And of course, the measurement of impact, because people will look on what's beyond the financial returns. What is the, how we measure the sustainability impact, how to measure the socioeconomic impact. So that's going to be important and key, that the project has the right framework. They need to develop the framework. So that needs to be assisted as well. And last but not least is the coordination between stakeholders. So that's why we need this kind of event that highlighted the needs for multi-stakeholders approach. And that's actually the key success of the blended finance. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Pradana. It's great to see some live successful examples from Indonesia, but you're also highlighting, I guess, that difficulty for scaling and replicating when so much support is needed at that early upfront. I guess we've looked global now, we've looked at Indonesia. We're going to go even more locally with Pak Dodi, who's from the Bali Kirti Development Fund, which has been a breakthrough for mobilizing non-state financing for development. So Pak Dodi, what is the Bali Kirti Development Fund? Why was it set up, and how does it work?
Okay, thank you very much. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I feel like now I'm a baby here. We are talking about 70 years establishment of IFC, and this is my big brother, 15 years, right, SMI, and now I'm only less than a year. So I'm really a baby in this stage. But anyhow, I think as Bu Mari said also, and our president-elect also said that stop the omon-omon, stop talking, let's do something. So allow me to introduce or tell you the story, because I think I also being pranked because my grandfather and my elder brother show like more than 5-6 slides, and then I was told to show only 2 or 3 slides. So I try to.
That's all right. I was told you don't need any slides.
Okay. Okay, so I feel better now, Ruth.
Okay.
So, okay, so yeah. If you follow the news, and I think we all experienced this back in 2020 to 2023, Bali is among the worst hit by the pandemic. Our economy is shrinking for more than 10%. And worse even because Bali's economic structure solely rely on the tourism. So 52% of our economy is based on tourism. So when the pandemic hit, the Bali government and also assisted by central government through Bappenas, the planning agency, we developed the Bali Economic Transformation Program. I think that's a good program, such a way. But I was assigned by the colleagues, by Bu Deputy, by Pak Menteri, to help the Bali government to talk and sit with the senior officials in the Bali provincial government to discuss and to find a way out on the execution of the Bali Economic Transformation Program. There are 2 main questions actually. Who will do or execute the economic transformation, and how you going to finance the economic transformation? So when we look into the numbers, you can see down there that with the new economic transformation program, the public sector will only be able to fund up to 5%. Because what it is there in the economic transformation program is quite a comprehensive program that combines both the basic needs and the achievement of SDGs, as well as advancing the quality of life of the Balinese and the tourism facilities. So that's why it comes into quite a high number. So for the human capacity, then the provincial government agree with the central government, with Bappenas, to set up the project management office. It is now running and established under the provincial government. And for the financing, we are then setting up what's so-called the Bali Kerti Development Fund or Bali Development Fund. So this is a kind of initiative that the Bali government and supported by the central government to say divert from the conventional way of financing the development. Why we are dare enough to do that? There are a couple of factors, and most of all that we see Bali as a brand. Bali itself is a brand. And the other thing is that we see that the demand or the users of public services or public facilities in Bali, they are pretty much different with other places in Indonesia. When we dig down into the data, we did this a simple survey. We realized, in average for Bali, there are 1 resident and 6 visitors at any time. in the corridors, in the tourism corridor like Nusa Dua and then Kuta up to Canggu, even the ratio is 1 to 12. And the visitors, they are spenders. They want to spend their money. So I will take you into the story about one of our projects later, why we are developing that project. So that's the reason behind the BDF. And BDF itself is set or is established with 3 main missions. The first one is to prepare or develop the project or opportunities in Bali that fall under the government obligations. So it's like, the potential public investment that can be financed or be collaborated with the private. The second one is to raise funding for development. And the third one is to provide financing. We are working on 3 sectors at the moment. First one is the MSME, the medium and small enterprises. Second one is for the industry, but in Bali you don't have big industries. They're basically MSMEs as well, but focusing more on the, industrial activities. And the third one is the infrastructure. Next, please. So those are the scope of work or activities of BDF. And how we establish the BDF? There are several options. Whether we start a new venture or we attach that to existing venture like our development bank, or we acquire existing company. And we ended up acquiring an existing venture capital company. So what are factors that we are considered when acquiring the existing company? First of all is the regulatory framework, because this company is regulated under the Capital Market Authority. Yeah. Second, that we have the financial constraint. When we look at the options for us to set up a financing company, like PTSMI, for instance, it requires the startup capital of 250 billion rupiah. So it is about $15 million. The provincial government don't have that money. And during the COVID, during the pandemic, the Bali government is on deficit. So they don't have that money. And the other factor is the operating capacity. We don't have time to do a startup. We need to run immediately. So that's why we acquire an existing company. I won't say it fortunately, but the situation is that for most of our venture capital right now in Indonesia, they are working with the small and medium enterprises. They are on decline. So we are able to acquire a company. It is called the Sarana Bali Ventura. It is a private company established in 1994 for a fraction of cost. The acquisition cost probably cost us less than $1 million.
Wow.
But the book value of that company is more than double of that. So from very beginning, we already made a profit on paper. Yeah. So next, please. With that company, we inherited already 6 ventures. The first one is Sarana Bali Dwipa Jaya. It is a real estate, construction, transportation, and warehousing company. This is now the owner of the Bali subway project. We just signed the deal end of July to develop for the first and second stage $10.8 billion subway project from Nusa Dua to the airport up to Canggu. So that's our, even we are a baby, we try to run fast. So this is a company that under the control of the Bali Development Fund. We also have other company like the coffee liquor production, and we have two the pinisi, the wooden boats. So you are welcome to use our service as well. They are operated in Komodo Island, and we have several others. So this is the companies that we are inherited. Next, please. So I think again, because we are baby, we are not been able to come up with an extensive numbers here. But this is what we learn on when you want to set up this kind of things. Yeah. First of all, is you have to have a visionary leader. We are fortunate that our previous governor, Pak Koster, and the current acting governor, Pak Mahendra, they are both very open and also very decisive at the same time. So they are the one that say, okay, let's go ahead. Yeah. The second one is that we also have colleagues here, Pak Samsi, if you don't mind, please stand up. We have a college like Pak Samsi. He is a champion within the bureaucracy. He is a member of the bureaucracy who help us to sell the idea and also to encourage the other officials to listen to us. Otherwise, this is not going to happen. The third one, we also have to have a committed and competent management. So with the company that we acquire, we have the management that already have more than 20 years experience with the company. That help us to avoid the headache of starting up and then, doing all the adjustment to have the company run. And the last one is actually the understanding of the market, like what I just said, that we understand what it is going on in Bali. And that's helped us to design the program and to develop the company in the future, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Dodi. Very inspiring and ambitious fund that you've set up there, and an accelerated path, which of course this is looking at how we can replicate and scale up. You're only 5% concessional capital, a 1 in 20 mobilization would be fantastic, so great to see. Dr. Sapiro, last but definitely not least, we'd like to talk a little bit more about how we can optimize the role for philanthropy in blended finance. And so maybe just to start us off, what is the current system that Asian philanthropies are working in, and what are the challenges that they're experiencing and the opportunities then for blended finance and that role?
Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you, Bappenas, for having me. I think I'm here because I represent Asian philanthropy. The Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society, my organization, we work on philanthropy, CSR, impact investing, blended finance, all the ways in which private money does good in 18 Asian economies, so 16 countries, plus Hong Kong and Taiwan. So, and I was told that I didn't need slides, so you're just going to have to look at me. But all of our reports are available on our website, which is caps.org. So I need to test your imagination, because I need you to imagine that I am an Asian billionaire. And that's going to be hard because, I'm clearly a New Yorker, but I work with Asian billionaires. They tend to be men, they're very wealthy, they don't look like me, about the same age maybe. But let's just go into their heads for a minute. there's this great notion that there's all these billionaires out there, and if I could only get them to see why this project was useful, why this initiative was helpful, then my day would be made, my problems would be solved. And that is often a very difficult path to go down, because their thinking tends to be different than that. So what is their thinking? Well, first of all, we have to keep in mind that unlike the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which was on your slide, I believe, unlike all really American foundations, Asian philanthropy foundations are one-on-one with the private wealth and the corporate assets of the family, which means they don't have a large endowment to work with. Now, American foundations do. And so you have Rockefeller Foundation and the Gates Foundation taking some of that corpus and doing what's known as program-related investment. They have to spend that endowment, that corpus. That's not the case with Asian philanthropists. So there isn't a financial incentive in some ways to park some money in an investment opportunity, whether it's market returns or not, that doesn't somehow make other sense to them. So, so we have these family-dominated companies where there's really very little daylight between their personal philanthropy and their CSR. Oftentimes, and we can think of many companies in Asia, the CSR of the company is the family philanthropy. And let me give you an example. Indonesia's richest family is the Hartono family. Jarum Foundation is the foundation of Jarum, the company, and of the Hartono family. And that is the norm in Asia. Okay, so that's really important to keep in mind. Second, in Asia, aside from really Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore, the rest of Asia are emerging markets, which means that these companies, these families, they want to fund close to home. They want to fund in their hometown, where their operations are. So there's very little cross-border philanthropy going on. And when they do it, they're criticized for doing it. So there's really very little incentive. In fact, there's a disincentive to fund outside of your own country. So people don't put that money out. They want it to accrue to their benefit in the communities they care about. It's actually potentially a blessing, right? Because these families are committed to their place, and they're committed for the long term. So they will invest, but they're investing in tangible projects that they can see the benefit of. The other thing to keep in mind about these Asian billionaires is, unlike in other parts of the world, where you make a lot of money and you retire and you play golf or you do your philanthropy, no, that doesn't happen here. The day they stop wanting to make money is the day they really drop dead. They want to keep making money all the time. What does that mean? That means that they tend to want to work aligned with their own government so that they can find win-win solutions. So it's very important to align what you're asking them to do. It's really with government priorities and government agendas, because they want to stay in business and they want to stay on the right side of government. So it's important to just kind of keep in mind the landscape that we're talking about. And I just want to take issue with one word which you used, my colleague from SMI. The word unlock is often used around this topic, around blended finance. But it conjures up a vision as if the money is locked away in some box and all we need is the key. Of course, that's not the case. The money is being used for other reasons, oftentimes to increase improve their own businesses, improve their own assets. So when you're talking to them, you need to understand how to align those interests and incentives, and that's something else you talked about. So I agreed with you on one thing and disagreed on another. The term blended finance is something that is really misunderstood. And in fact, in this whole field, there's a lot of jargon. We did a study around impact investing, and 90% of the people we surveyed, family offices, said, we want to do impact investing, but they weren't yet doing impact investing because they didn't really understand what impact investing is. And the same goes for blended finance to a much greater extent, I would even say. So how is private money, how is philanthropy being used to do good and to essentially leverage those private resources to do more? These are different ways of thinking, like a broader definition, I would say, of blended finance, which usually is talking about crowding in private money to do big infrastructure projects, especially around energy transition. But there's other ways in which private money can do that. First of all, it's public-private partnerships for social good. Now, historically, public-private partnerships have been to build a port or a toll road or, some kind of coal processing plant. But increasingly throughout the region, public-private partnerships are being put in place to deal with educational outputs, to deal with health, to build hospitals, to increase clinics, to do the kind of work that the rigor and thinking and resources of the private sector can work with the government in innovative ways and bring scale to those kinds of social challenges. So that is happening, and in fact, we did a study of ultra-high net worth individuals, and 85% of them said they they believe there will be a rise in public-private partnerships for social good. I always thought the SDG 1 platform could have more social projects on it in addition to infrastructure projects, and then there might be some interest there. Another aspect of how private money is working is when the government asks the private money to work. So let me give you some examples. In China, philanthropy is written for the first time into China's 5-year plan. China understands that they can mobilize philanthropy to get to the goals that the Chinese government wants. And this became very clear during China's poverty alleviation scheme, which took place between 2016 and 2020, where China lifted more people out of poverty. In fact, they alleviated absolute poverty in such a big country. Philanthropy, personal, from the founders of Alibaba and those kinds of Tencent, and the companies, including the state-owned enterprises, were really important partners. Of course, were they asked to do it? Did they have to do it? It doesn't really matter in China. They did it, and they participated in a collegial way. In India, you may know that India is the only country that has a required 2% spend from pre-tax profits for the top 18,000 or so companies. They have to spend 2% on CSR, have to. Now, that has brought enormous money into the sector. That's good. During COVID, Narendra Modi changed the calculation a little bit by setting up an organization, a fund, called PM Cares, Prime Minister Cares. And 50% of the CSR money went immediately to Prime Minister Cares, PM Cares, which is 100% opaque. But it just shows that the person making the ask, i.e. the head of state, really matters, because business people, they want to work with government. So when Narendra Modi asks all these companies to give to CSR and then give to PM Cares, they do it. When the Chinese government asks organizations to involve themselves in poverty alleviation, they do it. When the Singapore government asks a number of donors to give them 25 million each for the Philanthropy Asia Alliance, they do it. So my advice would be, make sure you ask the right people to make the ask, because it really matters to a lot of these philanthropists. And let me just say that I think there's a lot of potential to work with Asian philanthropists. It's just a matter of making sense to them, which means not going to them and saying, hey, rich guy, fund my project. It's more saying, hey, rich guy, what are your goals? What are your ambitions? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? And how can my project and what your goals are work together so that we can have a better future for our children and our grandchildren? That message resonates. So I think it's really about how to position these projects in a way that makes sense to these wealthy people. And with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Great. Thank you to all the panelists. We have a little bit of time left, I think, so I'll open to the floor if there are any questions for any of our panelists. Just raise your hand. And maybe while we wait for the first questions, I'll ask one of my own. So this is building a little bit on Ibu Mari's question, which was about the sequencing issue. And we've talked a lot about successful examples, but my question is, who leads the development? Is it something the private sector leads and then the public philanthropy comes in, or is it capitalized by concessional finance? I guess Dr. Shapiro, she talked about ask from the governments, and Pat Pradana, you talked about in Western Sumatra, it came from the commercial side, but if there's advice here, that would be greatly well received.
I think who should start, I guess it should be the government to lay down a solid development plans that they need to deliver, as well as targets they need to achieve. I think it's clear. So long as it's embedded in the national documents, as well as the regional, local documents in the case of Indonesia, because we are a decentralized country. So as long as it's clear, and hopefully it's also can be committed as a multi-years as well as multi or cross-governments programs, is even better, because it's going to relieve the programs from political risk. But of course, there is an element to that, but that is something that investors or private sectors, we need to account that risk when they are making the investments. So start with the government with clear intentions, clear programs, and clear targets. And then there's also a role of intermediaries like us, like other development banks, multilateral banks. So that's unique positions of development banks or development finance institutions are actually trying to bridge the gap between projects and finance, and trying to make that connections and trying to get the attentions of the others parties that we are seeking attentions to, and also trying to, what Ruth is saying, is trying to understand the mindset and the objectives of the other side. That's really important to make this interest, not just interest on paper, but interest that can be realized. So that's how important it is to have intermediaries, and of course, the last but not least is actually the developers on the ground who's actually delivering the projects. They need to understand that when I say unlocking, it's actually what Ruth is also implying, that it's finance has options. They can actually invest here, invest there. So if you want to sell your projects, and you need to sell it properly, and with the help of intermediaries, that proper message can get across.
Can I say?
Please.
Thank you. I was talking to a big foundation in the United States, and this woman said, I don't even talk about climate change anymore. I don't talk about mitigation. I don't talk about conservation. It's decarbonization, 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 she said. And we did a study called Building Back Greener to find out how Asian corporates and business leaders and philanthropists are really responding to climate change. We interviewed 165 different people, mostly in business, and not one of them said, can I focus on decarbonization without thinking about economic development livelihoods? Now, Ibu Mary said this too, right? So I think that when we're thinking about crafting solutions, Indonesia is a grown-up country with incredible resources, as evidenced by many of the people in this room, and incredible minds. And I would say we need to craft projects and solutions that make sense for Indonesia, and not accept as a fait accompli some other solution that came from somewhere else. And I know that sounds kind of obvious, except it doesn't happen enough. And so I would say, who's doing the ask? It's a conversation that needs to be very well thought out. And I think the IFC does this all the time. You're all involved in these conversations. So I just want to point that out.
So less one ask from one air, but a conversation and partnership from the start. Right. Great. Well, I think that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Thank you so much, all of our panelists. Just to conclude, I'll attempt to summarize the kind of rich discussion and key recommendations. So I think we found that blended finance is a strategic tool, and it can galvanize significant resources, not to use the unlock word, but it's not a silver bullet. And there are many, many challenges that remain, whether it's scale, complexity and structure, complexity of interest, stakeholders, absence data, framework standards, the perceptions of the high risk, and the human capital and knowledge gaps. And so to overcome these, we really need to strengthen those partnerships, come together around a conversation. There needs to be enhanced transparency, governance and accountability. There needs to be aligned interests and long-term commitments where local perspectives and engagements is critical. So thank you all again. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you so much, the moderator, and also all distinguished speakers. Thank you for the sharing and also insight. Very fruitful discussion also. Please, you can return to your seat. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the third session. The third session of the parallel thematic session of high-level forum on multi-stakeholder partnerships 2024. We still have another last session at this Medan room after the break. So for your information, our next agenda of high-level forum on multi-stakeholder partnerships 2024 parallel thematic last session is on empowering micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, strengthening microfinancing for inclusive and impactful development, and we will start at 3:30 Central Indonesian time. Once again, we will start the last session, which is the fourth session, parallel thematic session, at 3:30 Central Indonesian time. Thank you, everyone. And now you may enjoy the coffee and tea that we already provided at the foyer. We will see you at 3:30 Central Indonesian time. Thank you.